Hello, I'm your host, Marcus Garrett. Every week I have entertaining conversations with your favorite influencers and entrepreneurs. Now, let's get started with this week's show. Drawing from their journey paying off $200,000 of debt in 5 years, quitting their high-stress corporate jobs, and retaking control of their finances, Julien and Kiersten Saunders are the authors of Cashing Out, Win the Wealth Game by Walking Away. Their book offers a revolutionary financial and career path to break free from corporate America's grasp, make peace with your finances, and build wealth on your terms. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having us.
Yes.
Appreciate it. Better late than never. Let me do a pay the bills real quick, and then we'll jump right into the questions. The Life After Debt segment, the award-winning Life After Debt segment, is brought to you by our partners like Terry Ijeoma. Learn how to supplement your daily, weekly, or monthly income with trading so that you can live your best life. Terry's a stock and options trader whose award-winning system teaches students how to make up to $1,000 a day responsibly investing in the stock market. Learn more in your show notes or visit themarcusgarrett.com/investwithterry. So first question coming hot out the gates of the Life After Debt segment is, looking at your book notes here, we're told to follow the same script as our white colleagues. Shout out to my white listeners. Work hard, make money, save, and invest. Yet despite putting in twice the effort, you end up making less and are routinely passed over for career opportunities. Why and how does your advice differ for communities of color?
Yeah, so one, just thank you for having us, man. It's always great to connect with you. And two, to answer your question, one of the things that we learned really early on, and even before we wrote the book, was that we can't really have comprehensive conversations about money without talking about work, because that's how a lot of people earn their money, through jobs, and especially the good paying jobs tend to be in what people refer to as corporate America. And there's certainly a certain stigma that comes with that. And one of the things that we found really, as we started to dive into the world of personal finance and started learning all this stuff and applying it, as we went to share it with some of our friends and family and colleagues, is that it just kind of went in one ear and not the other. And in other cases, people really just hated their jobs and they were just complaining about it. And there was just this general acceptance that it is what it is. There's nothing that we can do. We've been warned that this is what it was going to be like, but it's kind of your job, especially if you're the first person to make it in your family, to kind of keep on grinding, to just keep accepting these blows and to power through. And the unfortunate reality is, I think we're old enough now, there's enough data now to look back and be able to say, all right, well, how has that worked out for us? How is this sense of resilience, or what we call Black excellence, how has this worked out? We've all gone on, gotten degrees. Some of us have gotten advanced degrees, taken on student loan debt. We've all done these things. We've all continued to follow the standard rules of personal finance, but we're still not nearly where many of our white colleagues are, right? So this is less of a criticism of white people as a whole, and more so just the confrontation of some uncomfortable truths, right? So if we're all being asked or tasked with saving 10 to 15% of our income, and that's supposed to be the thing that gets us where we want to be 30 to 40 years from now, we also have to reconcile that we're now starting at the same base, right? Black people are paid less on average than their white peers. Black women are paid even significantly less than that. I think the number was somewhere in the 60s. It's up, to 67, I believe, over the last couple of years, but it's still significantly less than they are. And so for us, it was there has to be a different set of rules, right? Because we're already kind of living, unfortunately, by a different set of rules in the workplace. And so we have to think about our careers differently. We have to think about our money differently. And so we wrote the book, quite honestly, for ourselves and a lot of the people that we know that are like us, so that they don't run into some of the same pitfalls that we run into. And unfortunately, like a lot of the people that we know run into in the workplace.
What would be, either through your personal experience or in writing the book, what is the greatest flaw in this advice? And then what is the solution?
In the traditional advice?
Yeah, traditional advice, work 30 years, save 15%.
Yeah, I think it's the nuance that's missing. So we all know that our careers are a game, right? We talk about corporate politics as if it's playing the game, right? But we assume that it's a game that we can win. We assume that if we take the right path and do the right things and join the blue chip company, then it's a game that we can win. But the reality is winning looks very differently than the way that it might have looked for our parents or well-meaning adults who gave us that advice. Winning in the corporate game is actually the ability to walk away from toxic situations and to quit on your own terms. And there's a lot of us, despite having achieved all of these ambitions, still can't do those two things. On the other side, the wealth game is a game that we can absolutely win. You can absolutely take control of your income. You can absolutely take control of your expenses. You can create an investment portfolio that helps you design your life in a way that you want to spend your days. That's a game that we can win. And so what we're trying to do is kind of, one, reveal that uncomfortable truth, as Julien called it, that the career game is likely not one that you can win. Hundreds of years of data suggest that. And refocus your energy, refocus your ambition towards something that is achievable, like the wealth game.
It says here from the book, financial freedom's within your reach, but playing by corporate America's rules will only take you halfway there. To win, you must eventually walk away, which you talk about. So my question is, how do you prepare your roadmap to walk away? And then you talked a little bit about it. There's both the fear, both monetarily, and then maybe the stigma. So how do you prepare yourself to walk away? And then how do you overcome the stigma of doing so?
There are a couple of things that I think are imperative for people to feel comfortable and confident walking away. I think the first one is getting very clear on what the purpose of your income is. And that's literally one of the chapters that we wrote, being very clear on what to do with your income and what to do with your future income. And we essentially created a framework that people can follow that allow them to provide some thought in some direction around what they should be doing with their money to ensure that they can ultimately achieve financial independence. I think the second thing that they can do in terms of the amount of time that they believe that they need to spend working is to begin with the end in mind and to work back from there. I'll say this in terms of corporate America, and this is in part from our personal experience, but also just from what we know, that it is an incredible training ground. Right. And so one of the things that we've found is a huge benefit is that if you are able to kind of break through those barriers and climb the ladder, regardless of how high you climb, you tend to have access to a significant level of training and skill development. What we're suggesting people do is to, rather than lock themselves into the idea that they will learn that skill and grow in their careers, whether it's with one company or another, is to figure out other ways to develop those skills and then monetize those skills outside of their job, right? And so we create another framework, which we call the 15-year career, which essentially guides people what to do through a 15-year period. This could be the first 15 years of your career, which might be a little harder to do, especially since people tend to start out earning entry-level wages, which tend to be a little bit lower. But the idea is pretty simple. It's like going into the gates for that first third, living significantly below your means, going in that second phase, doing a lot of test and learn, jumping around. And we're seeing a lot of that now with people being willing to jump around both in their company and outside, right? Not just to earn more money, but to learn different skills. And then really using that final third to pressure test and monetize some of the things that you've developed. And we tell how we were able to do that in our careers, but we also share a couple other stories of people that we know who've done that exact same thing and ultimately have been able to build streams of income that very quickly eclipse their salaries, which ultimately allows them to invest more, save more, do other things, live a better life, and ultimately walk away from their jobs.
For the benefit of the listening audience and possibly for the person asking the question too, I also want to pull out some numbers for them to work from. So for y'all, to the degree that you feel like sharing, you say corporate background, can you talk a little bit about what y'all did either individually as or combined, and then what that kind of household income looked like? And then Julien, you specifically said a significantly below your means. Like what do those numbers mean? Like what are they living on and kind of what are they working with?
Yeah, so when we left our corporate careers, we were both in marketing and brand roles. Julien was in a brand role and I was in more of a marketing business development role. I had achieved the coveted position of director. And so I was making a 6-figure salary with a very healthy bonus that wasn't always guaranteed, but was given to me annually while I was there. And then Julien was in the same boat, kind of a manager over a really important part of the business and was making 6 figures and had an annual bonus as well. And so at the end of our journey, our household was making, had 2 high-paying salaries. It didn't start that way, though. So I think that's a really important point to make to readers, is that oftentimes when that question is asked, they're talking about a moment in time. Over a 10-year period, we tripled our salaries and continued to take on jobs, side hustles, cash flowing investments. So there's a difference between kind of wages and salary and overall income. But even when we were making less money, when we decided to move in together and get married, we knew that we wanted to live on essentially one of the salaries and use the other salary to create investments, pay down debt, really accelerate our retirement planning so that we could move on to something else. And so I think at our peak, our savings rate was around 70%. Mm-hmm. And this was before having to pay for childcare. This was before having a lot of the bills that we do now. We kind of subsidize my mother-in-law's housing and a couple of other things. But we were able to do that. And we did that for only probably like a year before we decided to buy other things, get a bigger home, start talking about family planning. And so it wasn't a practical goal for us to maintain. But I think that's important, is to understand how fluid these concepts are and recognize that sometimes you just need to sacrifice, using air quotes here, for a short period of time. And then you can kind of ease off the throttle and switch your strategy to something more sustainable.
Did you arrive organically at that 70%? Oh, I mean, what I wrote down here, and I know you had I'll get it for the visual magic on YouTube. You had an article in the New York Times for your fire story. But really, I think niche to y'all is y'all did financial independence, retire early, for people hearing that start for the first time, versus their house burned down or something to that effect. But you were doing it with a family. So did you arrive there organically? Was it a plan? Kind of talk us through how you got to living on one income.
Well, the living on one income part was just made sense for us, right? It was really just a matter of saying, we know we earn more than we need to live comfortably. Yeah. And so wherever the rest of it came from, we weren't like targeting trying to save 70% of our income. That's just sort of where we ended up during the time period. I believe that was 2017, 2018, somewhere in that ballpark.
It was before that.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't remember. I think it was before that.
Okay.
I guess, again, for numbers and geographic, is this Atlanta based, so people can have cost of living and things like that? And also, I'm going to plug a cost of living calculator, right?
Yeah, no, and that's important.
It's important. Yeah,
that's important, because we've had those conversations too, and I also credit you for constantly doing that to remind people that looks a little different, because you might hear somebody talking about what their salary was in New York or DC, and you'd be like, goodness gracious, I can't imagine how much what that would be like, or even Austin, I believe in your case. But yeah, this was the Metro Atlanta area, so we didn't even live in Atlanta proper, but most people don't in Atlanta. That's just kind of how the city is set up. But yeah, that's kind of where we ended up after both salaries, bonus,
couple of promotions,
cash flowing rental property. Yeah, it was a great time. Like we were enjoying it. It was a simple life. We didn't have a child at the time, as Kiersten said. And because we were smart with how we managed our money during that time period, it really helped to expedite where we are today.
So I think I've set a solid foundation here, a bit of a pivot, going back to how to design a life that allows you to enjoy the little things now while setting yourself up for future financial security. And that's coming from a quote from the book. Once again, we're going to continue to plug that. But my question is, that sounds a lot like in conflict to traditional financial advice, which I think we're trying to, where in that case, you starve now to gorge later. In some cases, you starve now to starve later. People, they never seem to come out of the movement. So it's this forever sacrifice. And I don't think a lot of people want that. So in the words of Brother J. Cole, can we really have our cake and another cake too? and let us know how it can be done. Financially speaking, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea, there are still some extreme fire content creators that are out there that are eating, beans and rice and weighing their food every night to keep the cost under 11 cents a meal or whatever their methodology is. But I think most of us have kind of, as the movement has grown and as people have moved on and started families and, just kind of recognize the limitations of that approach of depriving yourself just so you can hit a number or a goal before you're 30, right? Isn't sustainable or applicable or any, in hindsight, even something that you enjoyed. So I think the idea, the goal or the hack of enjoying the little things now is, one, to identify what those little things are for you. Sometimes little things are just the free moments in life. I'm a person who likes to drink hot coffee in the morning out of a mug instead of a thermos versus like eating breakfast in the car. That's a little thing to me that doesn't cost a ton of money. What it requires is time. And my financial goals were based on me buying back my time, buying back my mornings, buying back my evenings and my lunch breaks, right? But I think it's based on determining what the actual goal is. If it's an age thing for you, if you want to be done by the time you're 40, then yeah, you got to accelerate those financial goals. And that may mean either focusing on income and maybe doing side hustles or being overemployed, as the new trend suggests, and getting a second remote job. Or if you're not really worried about age and you're just looking for a number or a timeline or a feeling that is more conducive to flexible approaches, then you can kind of take on this approach that we've taken on, which is where frugality and flexibility kind of coexist. There are some months where our savings rate is much higher. There are other months where it's non-existent. There are some years where we can look back at the end of the year and be like, damn, we put in, $60, $70, $100,000 into the market. And then there are other years where it's significantly less. But the goal is to be intentional and to revisit your finances on a regular basis. It's not like a driver's license where you just get to like set it and forget it and not renew it for 10 years. It's an ongoing relationship that you're constantly managing and reevaluating. And we wrote our book with that in mind. There are, at the end of every chapter, there are rules, which are kind of the tried and true, evergreen, we'll die on this hill and pieces of financial advice, things like pay yourself first, spend less than you make, just your basic rules that regardless of what happens with this country will probably make sense. But then there are the rituals. These are the things that you should ask yourself on a regular basis. These are the things that you should question on a regular basis, revisit, check in with yourself. It's the inner work. It's the psychology around why financial goals can be so hard, is because you haven't checked in on yourself to see if that's even something that still matters to you. And so I think it's important to kind of remind people that regardless of what a guru did or a prominent voice in personal finance did to achieve their goal, your goal is your own. And so make sure that in your practice that you have moments where you're constantly checking to make sure that it is still your own and not just some, parrot of what you've heard online or seen other people do.
I've got 2 comments, and Julien, looks like something's weighing heavy on your mind. So I'm gonna come to you, and then I have a follow-up question. But I like for the listeners, so I'm going to hit it again. Frugality and flexibility. I like that, and your rules versus your rituals. So Julien, am I reading your face correctly? Did you have something on your mind there you want to share? Because I wrote my question down. I'm good.
Yeah, I did. And I wanted to add one of I think the most important keys is really to get more comfortable with selling. I'm not someone who was trained or ever had a sales role. And so the idea of selling felt a little unnatural to me. Now, granted, I did work in marketing, and so I was a bit adjacent to that particular discipline, and I was able to get exposure to it. And as a result, able to employ that skill set a little bit as an entrepreneur, as a creator, as a, you name it, all of those things. But I think a lot of people, just reflecting back on the thousands of conversations and exchanges that we've had with money, they focus so much on, and we agree, like finding this balance between frugality while trying to still stay on a strict budget and still enjoy life. But they just continue to ignore like the value in simply finding other ways to earn more. And one of the stories that we share in the book that really influenced me was, again, I was in the brand marketing role, and this was in the early days of influencer marketing. And I'll never forget really fighting for a $10,000 raise. Like, I felt like I deserved it. I felt like I knocked out all my KPOs, but the reality is the role had a cap on the budget, right? And they weren't going to cut me $10,000 raise, and they just kept stringing me along, even though they doubled the amount of budget that I had to spend. My accountability, I got one of those responsibility promotions, like just the classic, one more year, you keep crushing it, and I promise we're gonna do right by you. But one of the projects that I ended up owning before I left was an influencer campaign. And I remember cutting a huge check to our PR team so that they could explore some influencer work. And we ended up paying an influencer at the time, this was around 2016, $10,000 to take a vacation to one of our properties. And the only thing that we asked him to do was to bring his daughters, take pictures down at our restaurant, write a blog post or something like that. And till this day, I look back to see, because it was so old school. Like, he had a website that had like a counter, so you can see how many people visited the website. Last time I checked, it was like 175 people in the last 6 years, right? So all of that to say, when you think about, at least for me, when I think about the fact that I was like fighting and like busting my butt for a $10,000 raise, the fact that our same company at the time was able to cut a $10,000 raise for someone who was not a celebrity to take a vacation, it just made me really reevaluate like what earning outside of the job might look like. Because even at the time, as a real estate investor, our rental property wasn't earning $10,000 a year. No. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so the fact that I'd learned that and saw that and understood how all that worked was a great example of me saying, I know how this world works enough from the inside. I'm going to see what we can do to do that for our own. And it's worked out pretty well for us.
Yeah, a few things there. One I'm gonna plug because it always goes viral. Is there's a story from Forbes, it'll be on your screen if you're watching on YouTube, that employees that stay in companies longer than 2 years get paid 50% less. It riles up the people. I'll probably tweet it out. If I wasn't on a Twitter hiatus. There's that. And I mean, I think the study's like 2014, it bubbles up every 4 or 5 years, something like that. And it's still the same math. People get a 1 to 3% raise if you stay with the company, and then external new hires get 10 to 20%. So the way to y'all talked about, I think you said tripled your pay. I grew my pay 400%, and with the exception of 2 occasions, I just moved jobs. I didn't even really move jobs. I moved to a new employer. I did the exact same job. I was going through that experience recently. I joined the Great Resignation recently, so I'm out here.
Congratulations!
As I said when I started the show, I was in a wife bee, and I'll be one after this college shirt comes back off.
But let me also say this, because I remember when we met, and I'm a little older than you. I don't know exactly how old you are, but I can just look in your face and tell. And I remember when you met, and I would say that at the time, from what I could read, I think you were a bit more focused on your career, right? I think you knew that these things existed on the outside, right? And I think for a lot of your listeners or people who may be listening or watching this, like, I think they can identify that. And I'm not saying that everyone should just watch out, right? Like, the day is going to come where you're just going to hate your job, or they're just going to want to let you go, or you're going to get frustrated. But I do think we owe it to ourselves to be honest about how we feel, right? And I think a lot of people have a very, very cozy and romantic relationship with their employers. Yes. We even refer to it, we talk about it like my company. It's like, that's not your company. That's not your company. You don't own that company. You don't sit on the board. You probably don't even own stock in that company, right? But this is a part of what we're fighting here. I think people know better. They've heard these stories. I'm sure this is not the first time that you've spoken about it, or they've heard something like this, but there's a mental block there that I think a lot of people need to go through. And so we were hoping in the book to, one, be able to present some relatable and realistic stories, some pretty easy to digest frameworks that might help people think it through, but also find that courage. Because ultimately, I think that's what people need. Like, find the courage to bet on yourself and to truly test what your value is worth outside of the particular job scenario that you are like currently a part of.
Yes.
Being transparent with the audience as well. What had happened with me, and y'all mentioned it earlier, is, the key to overnight success of the first 10 years. And I think we probably met around 16. So it's been about half a decade ago, and it was pre-pandemic. But I had been through I'd been through 6 reorgs before with one company. And I started hearing the reorganization rumor, there's going to be a reorg. Reorg. I was like, I didn't like that experience 5 years ago. And I'm 5 years older and 5 years. I'm 5 years older and 10 years more tired. And I don't think I'm gonna like it anymore this time. So I was like, let me, start to get. And like you said, I had prepared myself. I won't say for the inevitable. It was more so for the maybe.
Yeah.
I just didn't know. And I said this to the fiance recently. She's going through a different experience, and it's not even really career. I think some of it's age, and it's just like. The only way I know that now is because I went through it. There is there's no secret. There's no lesson. I know it because I went through it. That is the only wisdom I've gained. I just got older. I've seen this movie before, and I don't need to see a repeat. You know what I'm saying? I know how this DVD ends.
Exactly. And there's so many things in life that are like that. And what we try to do is now it's happened enough where there's data to support it. We gave a stat about CEO tenure, which is something that people should consider. The average CEO tenure, the average CEO tenure today is 5 years, right? You can bet on your CEO staying 5 years, and that's down from 7 a couple of years ago. And that's still weighted by the couple of CEOs that stay in place over 20 years. So when you think about the fact that the leader of the company don't even stay in the role for more than 5 years, you're definitely going to experience some reorgs over time. And then you think about companies themselves and what kind of CEOs they're looking to recruit and attract. What kind of company is Amazon, right? We lump it into tech because that's just what we call things that require computers, right? We're going to look back and laugh at the fact that Amazon's a tech company, Peloton's a tech company, Google's a tech company. All these tech companies have completely different business models. We should definitely start to segment these companies into what they actually are. But the requirements of a company that does shipping, cloud-based services, logistics, retail, grocery, what kind of skill set does that require? No one person can lead that for long periods of time unless you are the founder, which has been the case in a lot of these kind of longer CEO tenures. But as we're looking at, companies transform not just their leadership, but their entire business model, you have to be prepared for your career, your path, your skills to be disrupted. And there's nothing wrong with saying that out loud, but a lot of people just don't, it doesn't compute because they haven't experienced it yet. They haven't, as my dad says, been around the cup long enough to find the handle. It takes a while before you're like, oh shit, again? Really? Yeah. And then you get tired of it.
I have to write that one down. I missed it, but when I listen again, I'm gonna grab it. Something about a cup, something about a handle.